Good morning, everybody. Today is Saturday, March the 20th, 2021, and you are watching or listening to another edition of Forward Maryland. I'm Bill Woodcock.
And I'm Jason Booms.
Jason, happy first day of spring with you, comrade. How are you celebrating the vernal equinox?
Well, as I do this time of year, I'll be watching a lot of basketball. Unfortunately, many teams of local interest, for one reason or another, didn't fare so well in the first couple of days. Michigan State, unfortunately. I know there's a lot of Tennessee fans in this area, and it's unfortunate that they didn't fare so well against Oregon State last night. But it's nonetheless going to be fun watching without the pressure of knowing your team's going to go all the way. So, how about you, Bill?
Well, I had Ohio State losing in the championship game. And, unfortunately, they were the ninth victim of a 15-2 when Oral Roberts beat them last night. Not sad at all over the lack of Rocky Top being sung this month. Every once in a while, you can hear the warbles from various establishments in the Columbia area. And, it's a thing that happens. It'll be interesting to see where it happens next. Who can tell? We don't know, but stay tuned. Anyway, my Sweet 16 Cinderella plays today. I have Georgetown in the Sweet 16. So my bracket can be restored to hope. With a little bit of run by Patrick Ewing's boys. And March Madness 2020 or 2021, my God, there was no 2020. Begats a different type of March Madness, and with that entirely poor segue, we go into the topic matter for our today's podcast. As we continue with the third of our series of interviews with candidates for the First Congressional District and the 2022 elections. And today we welcome to the podcast 2020 and 2022 candidate, Jennifer Pingley. Jennifer, nice to meet you. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Jason. Hello, Bill. How are you guys doing today?
We are doing spectacular despite our March Madness mishaps.
And that's okay.
We are here to no longer talk about that stuff. We are here to talk about you. So, for those of us, most of our viewers and listeners aren't in the First Congressional District, although who knows what may happen next year. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, my name is Jennifer Pingley, and I'm the nurse that's running for Congressional District 1. A little bit about myself. I am a very, very passionate advocate. That's part of what brought me into nursing, and that's definitely what's brought me into this race. I've been a nurse for almost 15 years now. My goodness, aging myself. But that's really where I found my home, because nurses are involved in so much, and nurses can bring that to the table, which we see with other folks who have represented us, whether it's been in the state legislature and in the national forums. I got started because I wanted to advocate for my patients. I wanted to advocate for my fellow first responders, and it's just grown from there. The representation that we currently have in District 1 presents a very unique opportunity because it's another healthcare provider, and I feel that he's let down the community of healthcare providers, including our first responders. And that's something that I really take offense to, professionally and personally. And I'm here to step up and be that type of representation for the people I'm passionate about and for everyone.
So what made you, and then of course you're referring to as a healthcare provider, the incumbent Andy Harris, who's a physician. I know you're a nurse. Nurses that I know have extremely busy lives. What inspired you to to take on the burden of running for Congress, which is in itself quite a burden on your time and resources. In addition, or and I'm sure there's been some sacrifices that you've had to make. What's your driving force?
One of my passions is primary health care, getting people to see a primary care doctor, even if it's just for an annual checkup. And that's something I think that everyone should be entitled to. If you are a citizen of the United States, you should be able to get your annual checkup for free. And I started milling around this idea of, well, how do we get like a primary care for all type idea going? And I started shopping it around. And when I was doing my advocacy for like nurse reauthorization acts on the federal level, and I was talking to people who work for Senator Van Hollen, for Senator Cardin, for other folks that I got in front of, pardon me, Tom Carper's office from Delaware, when I was doing what I was already doing, and I'm chatting with these folks and they're saying, hey, well, that sounds like a good idea. Why don't you write it up and send it to us? Me being me, I'm like, oh, no. My job is to give you the idea. And they're like, well, you need to give us some of the ideas so we can take a look at it. And I worked up a very generic proposal, sent it out. I was very lucky enough to get in front of Joe Biden and had my couple of minutes there with him, covered a lot of stuff, but brought that up. And he mimicked what they said. He said, well, why don't you do that? I'm like, well, I don't run for Congress. And he's like, it sounds to me like you should be. And then I got in front of Nancy Pelosi. We had an event down in Baltimore where she was the guest of honor for MD Dems. And I literally had allergic laryngitis where I could barely squeak out words. Murphy's Law, timing is everything. So I had literally 2 sentences to squeak out to her before I could, I got my picture waved and went on. I squeaked out my 2 lines and she tells me, you should go for this. You should run for office. And she included it in her speech that night. Strangely enough, those were highly motivating episodes, but my dad is a lifetime hardcore Republican. And when I was chatting with him about it and he said, well, this sounds like maybe you should be the one in office instead, I thought he was joking. And he said it a couple of times. And my dad is really the one who pushed me. And I realized how much more comfortable I am doing this. You kind of have to take that step. But, my dad, my mom, my entire family has practically been lifelong Republicans. And for them to say, hey, maybe you should be getting up here and doing this has really been the push that I needed, because politicians can have other motives or they can be saying something to placate you, but your family is going to tell you how it is. And when your family says you actually have a good idea, you're a reasonable person, why don't you get up there and do it? I had to take them at their word, because they're not going to lie to me. And I've been lucky enough to find that in particular the Republicans have responded to me quite well with this idea, because I have the background of coming from a Republican family. I'm not talking about enormous expenditures, because I myself am very fiscally I want to say frugal. I think frugal is probably the better way to put it than anything else, because frugal means you're going to spend where you need to spend, but it's going to save you in the long run. And I think that's given me a connection and been able to build off that connection into other areas that allows me to better represent and feel comfortable. With the first run, I did extremely well. I got one out of every 5 Democrats voted for me in the primary. And I spent $2,000 on my entire campaign. So I got probably one of the best prices for my campaign ever. Pandemic, really made that a very unique experience, but that's kind of where it leads into, that's why I'm comfortable sitting up here saying I can do this, because I know I have that reach, and I know I have the response out of both the Democratic and the Republican parties to be able to sit here and say, I want to represent all of you.
Well, it was a very hotly contested primary in 2020, at least as you see, as it could have been given the times. But I remember the 2020 vote, and it was very close between yourself and and another new candidate, Mia Mason, who also has been on the show, and another candidate, Allison Galbraith, who had run before. So I'm glad that you were very encouraged by that showing. You should be, and it also sounds like you've gotten some terrific sources of inspiration to continue this quest. So what do you think, before I turn it over to Jason, what do you think will be the factors that could put it over the top for you in what should be another very well contested primary in 22?
I think what you're going to find is when people really sit down and look at the district, most of us are moderates, and I include myself in that group. While I happen to, be registered as a Democrat and I'm running as a Democrat, my fiscal responsibility and, like I said, frugality, as I would put it, that really speaks to Republican ears. Most of us are in that moderate range. Most of us aren't, um, we're not democratic socialists, which is what you hear a lot of the fear mongering going on. And I think we just need a candidate, in this case, me, who really can talk to the other side, make sure they understand that just because I'm running as a Democrat doesn't mean I'm not going to represent you as well. And to be able to speak that to the masses, because the masses in District 1 are Republican.
Yeah. So a lot. So I pragmatism and crossover vote, hopefully in the general from Republicans who are, and they should rightfully be so, ashamed of the representation they currently have.
Yes.
Mason?
Yeah, bummer on the no DSA thing though. But I do want to ask, Jennifer, what were the primary lessons learned from your first congressional run?
The primary lesson is that absolutely anything can happen. I literally expected a traditional run. My campaign force was, at the time when we went into lockdown, was literally healthcare providers. So I literally let them all go because they needed to be elsewhere. Doing a lot of things on my own and figuring out what worked and what didn't, without the level of support that I had when I thought I was starting the race. Everybody had to kind of change their footing in relation to that. I don't know that Harris did, because Harris kind of does the same thing every cycle. So I don't know that any of his stuff changed, but for the rest of us, it changed a lot. So being a little bit more prepared for things that are unpreparable. I don't know that a pandemic was on my list of things to prepare for while preparing for the run. The other thing is personal life things happen. My father was diagnosed with cancer and ended up dying shortly after the primary. And I like to say that he was my primary campaign advisor because my dad was very willing to have the open conversations that sometimes Republicans aren't willing to have. So realizing what the balance is with personal life, and literally anything can happen. That's literally the main thing, just because so many things were thrown at us and we were dodging left and dodging right and jumping up and down when you're trying to get over these humps of how do we get people online, how do I reach people when I can't go knocking door to door. What are we doing when the mail's slowing down? Because the mail slowdown started as soon as DeJoy took over. So those type of things were just out of the blue that we took for granted. And that's something that, having experienced all that, I'm much more prepared for this round.
One thing that's fascinating, and I've conducted a fair amount of research over the years in the public health arena.
Mhm.
When we ask folks who they trust as far as delivering a message on healthcare, nurses always rank up very close to the top. Physicians, it very much depends. Sometimes there's a feeling that nurses, have the best, they're up close and personal, frontline, whereas, some folks might be perceived as a little bit more aloof. or imperious at times. So in that regard, it would be fascinating to see a debate between a nurse and a physician in a general election. Has have you heard? I mean, I'm assuming you're hearing largely positive feedback coming from your background on this issue. Are people noting that as a positive point of differentiation?
Yes, there are a couple of people who have who have some experience in healthcare, and they're always worried about what's called scope creep, where you have different types of providers, more on like the nurse practitioner, podiatry levels, about calling yourself a doctor versus the term is, calling yourself a physician. And they kind of they're testing into those waters about, well, what does a nurse practitioner do? Well, what does a physician's assistant do? Those are the only people I've gotten any sort of pushback from, and it's from people who have a very very negative connotation about the way providers interact in healthcare, and they've always come away not angry. I might not have changed their view, but I didn't upset them, and I provided them with information, which I think is a huge change. You're going to find pockets of those type of people everywhere, and you're representing them. You're not supposed to alienate them. And if that's the only pocket I've really received, and it's a small pocket, received any sort of pushback with, I think I'm doing all right.
Let me ask you this. So, given the fact that you're representing a district that charitably could be referred to as purple, although demographic information would point to being it as being an R district, do you have any political role models in mind? Anyone you'd like to emulate as far as being able to provide solid representation in a district that's decidedly, you're seeing a strong partisan split?
I actually, one of my role models is Wayne Gilchrist from District 1, multi-term Republican who was socially liberal, but had a lot of the same fiscal standings I do. And he did very well. He was eventually primaried by Harris. But those are some of the things that you have to take a look at, is you have to take people from both sides. I've been a Joe Biden fan for most of my life, because everyone kind of on the shore feels like, well, Delaware's part of the shore, and Joe has been quite a stabilizing force in the state, literally from when he was working as a public servant on the state level, and then moving up into the federal level. So old school Joe Biden, with the way he manages also fiscal responsibility and things like that, are definitely things that I look up to. Excuse me. My apologies.
Oh, no worries.
The other person that I am very, very lucky to have is out in Illinois. There's a nurse named Lauren Underwood who is very much in a similar situation when it comes to, she's in a red district. And the way she has conducted herself and the way that she reads her community is something that I want to emulate. She takes a very matter-of-fact approach with things, and she talks to people. During the pandemic, she was doing these front porch connections where you could still reach your representative by, being on a front porch with them, maintaining your social distancing and wearing your mask, because to her, it was important to get out. Same way to me. I was going out with an N95, talking to people and calling people on the phone, doing some writing, getting the opinions and letting them know that I'm still there. And as a nurse, I can handle dealing with the pandemic and still being able to represent you. So that's something that I felt very empowered by, is to have another nurse in that position, and someone who is somebody who I can help emulate in real life, and know that a lot of the Republicans in her district respect her for the way she does that. And I can see using some of those techniques here. That's definitely something that the Republicans responded to.
And as far as the perceptions of the community, I'd be curious as far as, how do you think the district perceives January the 6th?
I think you have a large mix. You have people like me who would refer to it as an insurrection, and I think that's the bulk of us. I think you have, pardon me, people who sponsored buses to send people down to DC on that day who may not have realized exactly what was going on. My apologies.
No
But I do
problem.
think that there are people who absolutely knew what was going to happen. Going back and in retrospect, reading, watching the cell phone data ping, everyone going from Trump's rally down to the Capitol, what he said, the way he said it, and what the people surrounding him said. Um, you you have to respect that there is responsibility for actions, and if someone is saying that one individual person didn't do it, well, look at the group that was at your rally, and you put all those speeches together, and you tell me if you really think that putting it in a similar situation in a different country, you wouldn't have had the same result. And we would have, because we've seen those types of speeches. This was broken up across different people, but you're still hitting the same type of triggers that we see historically that gave people the gumption to march from that rally down and to literally destroy part of the Capitol. There was no reason for that, and public figures who would support that, that's a very strong no, for people, a lot of people here in the district. Some people who are a little bit more on the right wing probably have a little bit different opinion, but that's not what I'm seeing. Um, I think people are proud of being an American and of their government. And what I see from people is that they're not. The worst thing I hear is that people are, sorry, the best thing I hear is that people are disappointed. The worst thing is it was literally a insurrection on our own soil, which is just devastating. But people do see that. And even despite the way that people have tried to wash it in the media, at the very least, you're destroying our property as the United States of America. You are breaking our doors and our windows to our capital. And there is no excuse for that. And most people will agree to that. Whether or not they agree with what happened, they do not agree with the vandalism. They do not agree with, rifling through Nancy Pelosi's desk. They don't believe that people should have been beating police officers. That's it's a very hard sell for them. And like I said, disappointed is probably the best I've heard, but everybody seems to have a generally negative connotation of what happened in some respect.
Well, that is encouraging to hear. As someone who spent a fair amount of time on the Eastern Shore, not so much lately, unfortunately, but not being privy to those conversations that people might be having at the Royal Farms and Princess Anne, it is good to hear that there is a sense of disillusionment or anger at the actions perpetrated by the insurrectionists. So I'm glad you're hearing that from your fellow district residents. Bill, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, sir. To point out, Jennifer, to put a little finer point on the January 6th matter, and I thank you for your answer to Jason. But the incumbent has really, is my view, very much distinguished himself in light of and certainly following those events. Picking the fight with the former NFL linebacker who represents Texas, trying to bring a gun to the House floor. The latest issue with not supporting the resolution, supporting the Capitol Police, allegedly because the resolution contained the word resurrection. Your last answer suggests your answer to this question, but I'm still going to go ahead and ask it. What values is he representing by taking these positions? And I find it hard to believe that these are the values of most Eastern Shore residents.
While I'm not going to be able to speak for him directly because I'm not him, I can't tell you what his mindset is when he's saying or doing what he's doing. But what I can tell you is my feel of the district is, at the very least, people didn't want that to happen. And to take away valor from people who clearly deserved it, we had officers die trying to protect the Capitol and the people in it. And how can you, over a couple of words, and this comes to skill as a representative, over a couple of words, you're going to deny them the valor that they so clearly earned.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as a better representative, if you were really that incensed about it, you could have written your own. And even if all you did was delete a couple of lines and bring it up as a juxtaposition, I think he also had, if it wasn't him, it was someone else, because they referred to the Capitol as a temple of our democracy. Then do your job and write something and put it out there, because you need to be telling these people that protected you that you respect them. And we've got, law enforcement who tend to be Republican in the way they vote, and that's a letdown to them, and he represents them. Other first responders see that. They know from his voting on 9/11, the 9/11 funding, he voted no because I believe the answer was he was worried about how the money was going to be spent. Well, the money was going to be spent on the people who are suffering from a terror attack. I can't say, like I said, what he was thinking, but the patterns indicate that maybe as a representative, he's not as efficient of representing as he should be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thank you for that. And we have about 10 or 15 minutes left. So let's stop talking about that dope. And thank you for indulging us. But let's talk more about how there is bright new leadership to come in the first district. So something that I found very interesting in your answers has been the support you've received from people like Senator Carper, former governor, of course, and also President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, who of course has her own Maryland ties, native Marylander. And very few people know this. I'm sure you do. That Maryland at Cecil County is actually part of the Philadelphia metropolitan area. Along with Wilmington, Delaware, and that there are more than a few Marylanders who kind of identify themselves as Philadelphia exurbanites and not so much Baltimoreans or Washingtonians. They follow the Flyers and the Sixers. So how do you see the opportunity that exists for the Eastern Shore to be more of a regional partner with Delaware and southeastern Pennsylvania, and of course that extends over towards the Baltimore area? Your district is in Baltimore and Carroll counties. I've always thought that the 95 corridor, talk a lot about the corridor between Baltimore and Washington. That corridor between Baltimore and Philadelphia, in my view, has been an untapped resource. So what do you see as the promise and potential there for regionalism with that part of the country, that you could help bring forward as a representative?
One of the things that I love about District 1 is the variation we have in it. We do have I-95 running through. We have Route 50 that pretty much goes the length. We have, like you said, Cecil County has occasionally been referred to as the fourth county in Delaware, because most of us, we don't feel like there's a state line, it's a tax versus no sales tax line, going right down the state of Delaware for many of us. So we feel more of a kinship to people who are close. We have a lot of transplants who are coming from Philadelphia. I'm an Eagles fan. Ravens fan second, I will put that in there. But I grew up as an Eagles fan, and I'm raising my daughter as a Washington football team fan, just for anybody who's asking. That way we have a good sprinkling in the family. But that you have to realize that for a long time, the shore market has been very divided. I mean, even talking about our public television station, the public television station is out of Philadelphia for many people, as opposed to MPT out of Maryland. So when you're talking about marketing and things like that, they're marketing to this area. Those are the type of things I'd like to pull out. I would love to get more rural broadband so that we can have people staying or settling in a lot of our smaller towns so they can work remotely and still enjoy the charm of the small towns that we have. I'd love for more public transportation. I'm a huge fan of rail. And the maglev to me is exciting. I still haven't sorted through all the details, but being able to transport people in mass transit is another key to be able to get people in and things out. The more people I can bring in, the more businesses I can bring in when we talk about people wanting to come in and settle in this area. I think that broadband and public transportation is what they're looking for. People who are finding it hard to, find jobs in particular areas are more likely to move out. We want to preserve them by allowing them like broadband access to work from home. As we develop that type of simple concept, you have to realize that people are settling here who want to retire. They're done with hustle bustle of the city from Maryland. In Maryland, it's Baltimore, Annapolis, DC, and into DC, and it's really Philadelphia. Most people aren't going to cross the line from Delaware to Maryland when they're retiring because they're already in that day trip to the beach. But encouraging people to come down, which then means we have room to expand in our resort, our healthcare, and then our general retail, as we're going to get an influx of people. And the number one way is supporting infrastructure, supporting rail, supporting making sure that we have broadband access. It's something that these days you can't ignore. And because we don't have the volume of people on the shore, when you're talking about counting census, that's one of the reasons this area is so big, is because to have a congressional seat, you have to have so many people under that seat. So we're a dozen counties because we're not as densely packed and populated. So how do you connect all that? Because I've driven that. I drove that more times and several times in the same day, going from Carroll County all the way down south. And it's really, what else can we do when it comes to the things that they have in Philadelphia, the things that they have in, the suburban areas? And it comes down to the two things of public transit and really broadband.
I want SEPTA at the Perryville Amtrak station. That would be awesome. So thank you for that. And the last question I'll ask before I kick it over to Jason is that, as I do a lot of reading on on what's going on in the shore, and I go over still several times a year, even though my daughter's no longer at Salisbury, but I notice there's a lot of discussion about quality of life and development. And as we're here in Howard County and being a longtime resident here, it seems like a lot of the same themes that I remember hearing about 30 years ago here. And then plus also, so lots of questions about development. And of course, the environment is always a balancing act. I mean, the effects of climate change on the very sensitive marsh, and tidal regions, the bay, the effects of the poultry industry, what sorts of, beyond, I think your last answer spoke to this, but, in different aspects, how would you work to ensure that both current and future residents enjoy that fine quality of life that people on the shore have?
I think number one is to preserve the bay. And I think all of Maryland and the surrounding areas can absolutely get behind that. So in Congress, when voting for issues that would affect the Chesapeake Bay, I think we have a good standing that we would group together on that. The Bay is a way of life. The Bay defines a lot of us as Maryland because what do you associate with Maryland? Crabs. Where do we get them from? The Bay. That's our home. That's part of the heart of Maryland, no matter where you're at. And I think that that's the number one thing we can all get behind, is making sure that the Bay is taken care of and doing things that would improve the health of the Bay. The other problem we're having with climate change is flooding. I believe all areas, with maybe the exception of Carroll County, when you look at the floodplain maps from the federal government, we all have a floodplain area. And you can see in Queen Anne's County, you can see in parts of Dorchester, you can literally see where people are losing their land because water's creeping up. And okay, it's been creeping this far, this fast, but with the climate change, it's going to be rising at the water level is going to rise at an exponential rate and be creeping up on people's properties, to the point where when I was a kid, there was a place where I could see a house and it was yay far from the water, and now the water is basically up on it. That's a lot of change in a very short amount of time when you think about it. So it's going to be making sure that we're doing things to slow that down, because climate change, regardless of if you believe that the climate changes on its own, and maybe humans have nothing to do with it, despite we have evidence that humans change it, we need to understand that climate change is protecting what we have, making sure that the climate change is not drastic, keeping pollutions down, making sure that we are keeping track and holding businesses and government institutions, if necessary, accountable for what they're putting into the environment. A lot of this also goes back to farming. We've seen in extreme cases around the world, the more acidic rains destroy crops. Well, we're a farming community, and that's just unacceptable. So what are we doing to make sure that we're preserving the farming ways of life? Farming, I think a lot of times people don't see it as something that needs to be protected on like a security level. Like I personally think that farming should be up there with Homeland Security and all that, because if we don't have food, how do we feed our populace? Those are the types of things I'm very into. Protections for farmers. I want to make sure that they're getting subsidies, and making sure that we're having money available, and a lot of times, hopefully, even forgiving loans when we have the availability to, because protecting our farms then also protects our bays, because we want to make sure that our farms, regardless of what type of agriculture they are, aren't running off into well water, into the bay, and then poisoning it. So it's a cycle, and that's where the environment and environmental concerns at a federal level are important, because things don't always come from what you're seeing. I could have poisoning in another state that comes downstream, and that starts poisoning the water, which poisons the crops, et cetera, et cetera. Acid rain isn't necessarily coming from the area it's raining on. So that's why you need federal protections in those areas, because I can't then go to that state and say, hey, why aren't you enforcing this? Because, oh, we don't have a law against this, that, or the other thing. That's why it needs to be federal, because things that are happening elsewhere are affecting us here. So it's a balance between the local and the federal really needs to take charge and give everybody a flat, hey, this is what we're doing at minimum.
Jason, bring it home, sir.
Thanks. Jennifer, let's have a couple of questions for you. And obviously we've been talking about, the first district But obviously this changes over time. We're finding ourselves in a reapportionment redistricting cycle. And now they're saying that's going to be delayed, so you may not have a full sense of what the actual district is until a few months after when folks would normally find this out. How is this impacting your campaigning? Are you finding yourself focusing on areas that you're 99% certain will be in the district and sort of leaving the periphery, for a later time? Or how are you approaching the communications element to it?
I would say that I've not really taken that into consideration as much.
Mhm.
One of the things I'm doing, which is what I did at the beginning, is always start at home. So home for me is Cecil County. So I've been doing more in Cecil County than I have in any other counties right now. But that's also because it's colder with transportation, and there are people who literally just don't want to answer the door because it's cold. So from somebody who, while I will definitely wrap up and get out there, and I've been doing that to hand out masks and things like that. Um, I can completely respect how it's difficult to open the door to a random person knocking to go door to door when it's cold out. Um, I like to think that we're not the most winter of people in the district. While we do like it, we do get hassled by it quite easily. So I try not to. That's a personal thing that me and several other people in different counties have discussed. When it warms up, we'll be doing a lot more in other places. But I do not plan to ignore any of the counties that are currently in District 1.
Um, Related to that, obviously we've talked about it. It's a relatively full field at the moment. How do you win this time?
So, I think the way that I win is because people will start to recognize that I have the pull with the Republican voters that no one else has. Even as a career politician, Heather is still going to have trouble reaching across the aisle because of her voting history while she was in the Maryland legislature. Mia, we were able to see a first round with her previous run of how people voted. She didn't have as much pull through the Republicans as we would have hoped. Um, I'm not certain, because I don't have anything to go on for Matt and Dave, exactly how they're going to go, but I know the volume that I've been well received. And I think that's going to speak volumes to voters as we get closer to the primary. And the number way to do that is polls. So we're going to poll people in the Republican Party, and we're going to see what we need to do to better represent them in part of the campaign, because I'm running a bipartisan campaign. I might be a Democrat, but I absolutely am not going to leave Republicans behind, because those are the people I'm supposed to represent. And that's always been my branding. That's always been something that I do as a nurse every day. I I have to be able to advocate and represent my patients regardless of who walks through the door. I don't get to pick and choose my patients. I shouldn't be able to do that when I'm representing people at a federal level. I don't get to pick and choose what people's opinions are, but my job is to represent the most common and rational voice among them.
One last follow-up question. So let me ask you this. So when you're out and about, just sort of living your day-to-day life, someone recognizes you from the campaign trail. Say you're in an elevator, you've only got 15 seconds to tell them what you're all about. So if they were to ask you the following question, "What's your deal?" How would you respond?
My name is Jennifer Pingley. I'm the nurse that's running for Congress. And what I do is I represent everybody, which is part of my job as a nurse and what I intend to continue doing. So, regardless of what affiliation you are, my job is to make sure that the voice is heard, that the common sense approach is taken. And the fact that I'm a moderate Democrat who grew up with Republicans means that I understand and am very willing to listen to both sides in a manner that you may not see from other candidates.
Oh, good pitch, tight pitch. All right. I always like seeing that.
And,
right,
and I said I have no more questions. I lied. It's what I want to do, but the question is an easy one. So Jennifer, for anybody wanting to learn more about your campaign, perhaps get involved in your campaign, what would you have them do?
My website is electgenrn.com. That is also my Twitter handle. That is also the Facebook page and the Instagram. If you need anything, you can always email me directly at electgenrn@gmail.com. That is the personal email that I use. We do have one that's more for the campaign people, that's through the website, but people can feel free to reach out to me directly. Being a nurse, I work all sorts of hours, and you might get a response from me at 3 o'clock in the morning because I was up on a call. So I'm kind of a 24-hour person when it comes to that, and reach out. The best thing I can do is answer your question.
That's another thing with the nurses I know. I don't know how y'all do those like 24-hour days. I mean, just like, up at all hours, asleep at all hours. It's amazing. It definitely is preparation to be a congressperson, for if nothing else. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this. And I hope we can keep in touch and that you'll consider coming on the podcast again.
Absolutely.
Well, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jason, any closing words?
None for me today.
Nor for I. So for Jason, this is Bill. You have been watching or listening to another edition of Forward Maryland. We'll be back at you next week. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.